I'm Katie Dietz. I'm the Executive Director of Florida CraftArt, and today is the final day of this wonderful exhibit, which we certainly have enjoyed, and the community has been very involved in coming to see it. As many of you know, Florida CraftArt is a nonprofit representing more than 250 Florida fine craft artists in our Florida Artist Gallery. And we engage the community with educational programming, most of which is free. Every once in a while we'll have a workshop where there's a small charge, but it's free to enter the exhibits and to see many of the lectures. We are a member-supported organization, and if you are a member, please raise your hand, and we thank you for being a member because we need that support. And so we hope that if you're not a member, you'll consider joining. We are able to present these exhibitions and free educational programming because of support from the community. Elizabeth Rellinger is one of our board members, and she is the presenting sponsor of Beyond Words. We also have support from the state of Florida and the city of St. Petersburg for these exhibitions. This is the third show that has been curated by Cindy Bartosek. She curated contemporary fiber in Florida twice before, and I only wish I could get her to curate more for us. She also has worked on the programming, the artist talks, and we just appreciate her dedication and tireless effort. So please join me in welcoming Cindy Bartosek.
Great, thank you, Katie. This was such a delight to curate this show. I am a book artist. You know, when you're doing a show that involves a call to artists, there's always a little bit of trepidation about whether or not anybody's actually going to respond to the call, but also what's the work going to look like. And one of the nice things about working with Florida CraftArt is, you know, there's a high degree of confidence that what comes in as submissions is going to be show-worthy. And that was absolutely the case here. We had 103 pieces submitted. There are, and I've lost track, I think it's 77 pieces in the exhibition. So that meant, you know, about 25% were not chosen. And having to figure out what comes in and what doesn't is, you know, part of my role as a curator is how do we make all of these pieces created by very different individuals coming from very different perspectives with different messages and in different mediums. How do we bring all this together so it looks intentional and cohesive? How do we create an exhibition where everything plays well together? And we were very fortunate that the work that came in does play very well together. And I congratulate all of the artists who are part of this because, you know, if I hadn't had such wonderful work to begin with, the show would not be this fabulous. So the credit goes to those of you who chose to take a chance and submit. Because many of the artists are not book artists primarily. They are printers, they're painters, they're poets. But for this exhibition, they've chosen the book format to showcase their real art, if you will.
I'm happy to be here. My name is Lauren Dykes, and I am a book folding artist. As you can see, I don't know if you can see, this is my globe. Here, book folding is an art where you manipulate the pages by either folding or cutting and creating designs, words. Pretty much, I haven't necessarily been stumped yet on the images I have done, but this globe is one of my most intricate ones. And I also maintain the integrity of the text. So you can see, you could still read the book if you wanted to. You'd have to maybe undo some of the work. But also the text of the book is still there. So a lot of people ask me how it started. Well, I work for St. Pete College right around the corner, and we were cleaning out some cabinets and getting rid of some old textbooks. And for some reason I was like, we can't throw away that oceanography textbook. I don't know why, but like, I'm sure a lot of book lovers are like, would hate to see a book thrown away. So I Googled book carving, thinking I could carve into the cover, and book folding came up. And I've done a lot of paper crafts in the past. I have folded my 1,000 origami cranes for good luck in the past. Oh boy, where did my time go? And so I tried with a simple heart, and it went great. And then, so I started other new designs. And let's just say everyone in my family received a book fold for Christmas that year. And I started making some for some establishments in the St. Pete area. I made one for Art Pool, Banyan, and Haslam's. And someone caught wind of that and did a segment on the news. And so that's when Dilly Dally's custom book folding started. And me and my husband are a team that create custom designs for any occasion. And what I like to do a lot when I do get custom orders is find the story behind the request. A lot of these books that I make are gifts for someone for an anniversary, for a nursery. Recently I did one for a memory of like a past pet. And so I find those stories, and while I'm arting, I think of that story, and I art with intention. And so I like to, because it is a book and books are made of stories, so I like to have that story here. Also, I like to create reaction from people that see my work. We participate in Saturday morning market and a lot of stuff like that. And when people walk by, jaws drop. I've never seen this before, anything like that. And I love to be, the first book folder that you've seen. And hopefully like what that does is trigger a memory or a story for the viewer who experiences my work. Another question I often get a lot of is, how long does it take? And I say a long time. 6, depending on the intricacy of the design, 6 to 36 hours. This one is about a 24-hour. Again, I try not to time myself because I believe as artists, like we never really get like our money's worth of like the time that we spend on our craft. So I try not to time myself, but I do sometimes right away. Trying to think of any other questions that I often receive. Oh, we did receive a Creative Loafing Award in 2017 for Best New Use for Old Books. Who knew that was a category? But I won it, so that was fun. And we've done a lot of segments and been featured on HGTV, 100 Day Dream Home, and Rock the Block. They were scanning the room, and I was like, and they did a bookshelf that was actually a door, and then there was my Home Sweet Home book, and I was like, there's my book. So that was really exciting. Does anyone have any questions?
Is this just folding, or is there cutting involved?
Yeah, so let me give you a peek inside again. You can see that I cut in only so much, creating these little tabs that are folded. So none of the book is actually taken out unless by happenstance that a tab falls because it's too thin. But the art is called book folding, but there is some cutting involved. And again, I do maintain the integrity of the text. I think that's important.
Is that an ideal size of book for you to work in? Like a coffee table book?
Yeah, there is, good question. There is, depending on, I like a book with more than 500 pages at the like 20 to 23 centimeter height kind of works the best for this, and a strong spine. So there's different techniques. This would be the combi, where it's a combination of the fold and the cut. There's also just a fold and just a cut, and there's also something called the silhouette. And the silhouette is where, if you guys want to check out my social media pages or website www.dillydallysart.com or anything like that. You'll see some examples. We've done silhouettes of like Prince or Elvis or Miss Monroe, and I don't have an example of that, but if you wanted to check out, we could take a high quality, high res photo and put faces and photographs within the pages also. I would love to make you guys a book. It's a great gift for any occasion, like wedding anniversaries. Anniversary year 1 is paper, so you can't get any better than that. Okay, thank you.
But Cindy wanted me to talk a little bit more about the Buddha's phone book. I try not to give titles to my pieces because then somebody can say, well, what do you mean by Buddha's phone book? And the reason for it was the coloration of the red, the black, the white. And then I figured that Buddha wouldn't have any phone numbers. So they're all empty pages. I got into the hinges. Being a high school art teacher, I had to find something that made the kids go wow, and book arts was one of those things that made the kids go wow. My first experience with taking a book workshop was with Carol Barton down at the Savannah College of Art, which then gave me a whole year's of art lessons of how to work with books as a form for the kids in the classroom. I never told my administration, but I think I could have taught art for a whole year just using paper because of what I learned about bookmaking. I got into doing the bindings. The reason I went into the piano hinge binding was for a couple of reasons. One is I was trying to do something different than I've had experience with the 3-hole, the 5-hole bindings, the variations of all the different Japanese bindings, but I was just trying to look for a variation of it. My minor in college was weaving and textile design, so I was trying to find something that involved weaving. So the piano hinge was one of those things that I really had to figure out how to actually make the slits so that when you wove the pages together, that it would be tight enough. I never realized how much math is in bookmaking. You know, I took one workshop and she said, well, it's 19/32 of an inch. And I'm like, no. So you can't, that's hard to teach kids. But another reason why was part of my making of the books is the process, all right? The what ifs. What if I used knitting needles? What if I used chopsticks? I just the other day found a toothpick about this big that had all this decoration. What if I used a toothpick that big? What would happen with it? That's really what kind of dictates to me what happens with the actual sculptural piece. I'm a fiber artist. Good example of fiber. But it was the kind of thing of like, I worked with this one in a series. I had found these trays at an antique shop and they were used for staining wooden buttons. They were $1 a tray, they had the wire grid already in them, but the math came in, so I had to figure out how to make sure the square was exactly in the center. But then that ties into another form of book, which is the tunnel book, where one page is closed, you can see into the next page, and then so forth with it. Then I had to figure out how do I put them together in some sort of book. I still have 5 more trays if to work on. But for me, it's about all the variations of how many different ways can I weave a material, what materials do I have. One of my new art supply stores is Home Depot. In fact, I was just, where was I the other day? Somebody was throwing, I was yesterday at a horse farm and she was throwing out the bales, the wire from putting the bales of hay together, all different colors. I'm like, can I have that? But I wanted to share with you also, if I can say it, if you don't, is other variations of that whole what if. And I also brought one because of Christina's book, about her book with the flag book. But for me, it's also not just the way that it opens, you're talking about that, but also how it becomes a sculptural form. You know, if I could, how can that become a sculptural form? It's still a variation of an accordion folded book, but I could also start doing it where I could start doing some sort of 3-hole, 2-hole binding to sew these pages together. Then there was one that I found somewhere, it's made from envelopes. And just lick and stick them. And depending on how you put the pockets, you can stick artwork into them. You can do it reversal. But that was another my high school was getting rid of all of these envelopes. So another variation of that, so then I'm having breakfast with friends and they always drink tea. So I said, well, what if I use the tea bag hold the things to make a book? That's another variation of that. Remember these when you were kids? Yeah. Or they still make them? Yeah. I found it in a book as another book to work with. And again, I'm trying to use fibrous materials. I was using some old wrapping papers with that. This is an example of a tunnel book. You know, putting it through like the holes, first hole smaller, and then they start out big and get gradation back to the back of it. But again, it's another accordion folded book. This is my last one, and I'll shut up.
You're fine.
Okay. Are you really timing this?
Yes.
And then one of my favorite books, and that's the one where you need to cut 19/32 of an inch. I finally took a workshop with a woman in Lambertville, New Jersey, or New Hope, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and she actually figured out how to do this book. And it's called a star book, or is it right side up now? It's a series of 3 accordions that you put together. It's called a carousel book also because it becomes a star down. Okay. It becomes a carousel, but it also then becomes the star also. So and it gives you like 5 stages that you can actually work into. So that's another variation of the book. And again, I was able to get a tie-in using the different types of binding techniques. Not just the gluing it together, but I actually tied it together. Any questions? I still have 5 minutes.
3 minutes.
Oh, I don't have 3 minutes. A 3-minute question, please.
Nice try.
Yes, sir.
So, the book that you just held up, is the experience of the art supposed to be primarily visual, or is it supposed to be kinetic? In other words, is the observer, if I were to purchase that, for example, how would you imagine that I would enjoy it fully?
Pretty much just this way. Yeah. One thing I didn't, when I first did this one, I forgot about the back. I should have done something with the back with it also. And it does tell a story. The 5 stages that are in there. I used New York Times crossword puzzle, an old calendar, some old wrapping paper. But for me as an artist and as a book artist, it's more like that whole process of actually making it, and that all those what ifs. What if this was much bigger? What if it was smaller? What if it was made out of tea bags? Or what if I used knitting needles or something? But that kind of dictates to me then what the final product will be or what it'll look like.
But you're satisfied with that product. I mean, you're not saying still what if with that.
No, I'm satisfied with this. I did another one where you open it up and it's my name, Harry. In the because it was a workshop where you had to use a 5-letter word. So Harry was a good one. And it's fun because it's all about using the patterns of the what we were working with, pattern against pattern. Good, thank you.
I feel like a fish out of water in this group because I didn't go to art school. I went to library school. So this is the first show I have ever applied with something I've made for Florida CraftArt, and I was thrilled and astonished to be included, and especially after I saw the opening of the show and realized the quality of the work. I approached my book as a librarian, and so I am guessing that of all 77 books, mine is the only true nonfiction in the show. And the reason is that when I knew I was going to make a book, and even though I have been a librarian, I had never, ever made a book. So this is also my first ever book. However, the fact that the subject matter was completely open, I knew immediately what my subject was going to be, and that is my favorite subject, silk. And the title of my book is Bombix Mori, and the subtitle is The Moth That Changed the World. Bombix Mori is the silk moth, and the cover of the book is made from 1930s era Japanese kimono silk. I couldn't make the pages out of silk, so instead I used handmade Indian paper, so acid-free paper. What I have here is not everything I know about silk by a long shot, but I'm going through, for people who may not know silk, a story about silk. And I'm going to begin here with the beginning. And the beginning, of course, was in China. And here I have a representation of the most wonderful legend, a Chinese legend about how silk fiber was discovered. And that legend is about a princess who happened to be playing with a cocoon, and it dropped into her hot tea. And if you know anything about silk fiber, it must be softened in heated water in order to start unreeling from the cocoon. And so everything begins there, except it doesn't begin there, because archaeologists have recently uncovered cave art showing that silk was used already as a fiber about 500 years before this legendary princess lived. And so silk has an enormously long history in Asia. Then I went into the Silk Road because that was how the moth changed the world. Every culture that learned about silk wanted it. They wanted it. And I'm going to show you why. The Silk Road finished on one end in Rome, and this was ancient Rome. And you can imagine the togas. But here's what I want to show you. What's all the fuss about silk? Well, the fabrics they had were like burlap. And if they were lucky, they had cotton, coarse wool, linen, and then the gossamer. There is nothing that can compete with silk as a fiber. We also know now that it was, I have to qualify this now, it was the strongest fiber known to man, stronger than the same size of tensile steel.
Wow.
However, there is now a certain spider that has won out. So silk is now the second strongest fiber. So the rest of the book is showing you different kinds of silk And these, I started, of course, with origin. So these are from China. And then we go to Japan. Japanese silk being my favorite because I lived there for 12 years. And it was in Japan where I left librarianship and turned my hand to design. So these are just examples. A friend of mine told me after looking at my book that it's really self-explanatory. And so I don't really need to show you the book. If you're interested, you can come and look at it afterward. I've got some about Indian saris. I've got Thai silk from Jim Thompson. Every one of these is a story in itself. Here I'm showing some of my own design work. This coat was created for an international wearable art show in the year 2000. It was made primarily from vintage silk kimono. And I have examples of some of the beadwork. And then I've got some of my other surface design work, discharging and nature printing on kimono silk. And then being a true librarian, of course, I had to list my sources. So at the end of the book, if you have interest in learning more, you can always check out my sources. Oh yeah, and here, because I spent so much time in Japan, I have several actual volumes of Japanese stab binding. And so mine was done, of course, with silk thread, and I couldn't forget the cocoon. And so the cocoon is the tassel. I hope I'm educated. Thank you all.
This is my first book. The only other books I can think of that I ever made were when I was in elementary school, and I made those flip books and pop-up books and gave them to everyone who would take one. So this book started out life at the Moorian Art Center in my painting class with Nevern Covington. I was working on another way of painting flowers, and I wanted to try to get more gesture and a little more abstraction into this work. So I covered some watercolor paper with gesso, and then I would put, let me show you this one. I would put washes of acrylic on the paper. And while it was still wet, then I would dribble 91% alcohol over it. And so it actually blossomed. And then when that was done, I could go back in with a very fine line of paint to bring out some of the details. So while I was doing all this, Nevern was talking about this show, and that she thought that everyone in the class should enter it. But, and so she walked by my work and said that would make a great book. So I decided to try to figure it out. Went online, went to Amazon, and I never realized that there were so many people making books of every kind you could possibly imagine. So I chose two of my paintings, this being one, right here, and this being the other one, as the centerpieces for what I know as a French door fold. So after I had that done, I just started adding to the sides so that it went like that. But then I had to figure out a back, and I couldn't come up with anything that I was happy with. So I went to another painting and did the same thing. washes, blossoms with the alcohol, and more detail. And then came the part that I really didn't know anything about, which is how do you put it together, and how to be neat, how to be accurate, how to use your ruler, all that sort of thing. So these were glued back to back, and in some cases taped back to back, and then I could fold it, and it actually folded okay. And then I just made this little sort of clasp. So it could be viewed from either side. It's kind of fun. It's quite sculptural. And I know when I was taking photos, I had a lot of options to try to show both sides at the same time. While I was doing all this, I started to think about where my inspiration for working with a lot of flowers comes from. My father was a hybridizer. He was a horticulturist, and he did a lot of crossbreeding of carnations. His claim to fame was he developed the miniature carnation. And so we always had flowers in our house, but unfortunately most of them were dead. Because when you crossbreed flowers, they die. And then you just wait to collect the seed and plant that again and see what you get. So that was one thing that came to my mind. And then the other was a great aunt who would visit us every summer. And she worked for the Handel Lamp Company. It was the days of those Victorian globe lamps. They were white globes. And she would paint flowers on them. And so one summer she came and she brought me a tin of watercolors. So what did I paint? Flowers. So that was probably the beginning of the whole thing. Flowers aren't the only thing I paint, but lately I've been doing a lot of them in a lot of different ways. So the only other thing I wanted to tell you or read to you, today is Henry Moore's birthday. And he wrote, "If I set out to sculpt a standing man and it becomes a lying woman, I know I'm making art." So thank you very much.
I have two places in my life where book arts became part of my artistic practice. Growing up, my older brother was a graphic designer, graphic artist, and he taught me a lot about hand lettering and so forth. And when I was about 12, 13 years old, he was living overseas for a few years, and he would send me the most intricate hand-bound, handmade books that he would make out of construction paper with a fabric cover, or, you know, he'd paint little things inside of it. So I still have those books that he made and sent me. So I knew that that was a thing. And then in the early 1990s, the department chair at Florida International University for Art Education, Clem Pennington, was traveling every year to Cambridge, and he came upon an artist, Paul Johnson, who was creating handmade books, and Paul Johnson wrote several books about book arts and children's literacy. So Dr. Pennington decided that he was going to learn what Paul Johnson was doing and bring it back to Florida International University. And that's when I was enrolled in Dr. Pennington's Masters of Art Education program. So he did several immersion classes with the master's students he went through all these different book structures, and I could really relate to what Harry was saying about working with students with book arts. I brought it back to my high school students, and it took off. They were coming up with things I could not even imagine, and they were also doing altered books. Whenever the library would cull their collections, my students were running to the libraries and taking these old books and transforming them and making them sculptural and trying to challenge each other. And they would swap books with each other and do things in each other's books. So it really took off. I did an artist in education grant with my students, and we did a whole installation with life-size books, and it was really, they inspired me. They just kept going. So the two books that I have in this show, this one, usually when I start a piece, I'm mostly a fiber artist and printmaker, and I usually start with a concept, and I know somewhat where I'm going. This one, it's called Expect the Unexpected, and my only goal with this was to push a piece of paper as far as I could. And so the whole idea was to get it dimensional, to get it to open up, to not be flat, to not be opaque. And so each page was just, what can I do with a piece of paper to transform it? And so I did a lot of different pop-ups, cutouts, weavings in it, and I did the same on both sides. And so I didn't know what I was starting with. And when I was finished, I thought, I need to find a quotation to really define this. So I didn't even have a title. Okay, thank you. And so that's one side. So we'll swap here. And so I found a quote, and I always forget the exact, I'm going to have to read it here because it's sort of embedded. If you do not expect the unexpected, okay, I have to, okay, if you do not expect the unexpected, you will not find it because it is not reached by search or trail. And so I realized that that was really what the whole concept of this was that I'm seeking out where this is going, and it started out unexpected. This one was a little bit more of a concept. This one is called Flu. And we go down to the Everglades. I live in South Florida a lot, and when I started reading River of Grass by Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, and she described the slough, I'll read you my quote by her. The slough is an open, swampy space which may once have been a tongue of the sea or river or fresh water, a green, watery, flowery country, a place of herons and small fish and dragonflies and blue sky among the lily pads. And so when we would go down to Taylor Slough in the Everglades, some of these were from my photographs, some of these were from old biology books, some of it was some copyright-free images that I found, some from my drawings, but it really sort of embodied the feeling that I would get when I'm walking through the slough in the Everglades, taking her quote and sort of embodying the actual experience of being down there and just sort of combining these different images with her words.
Greetings, everyone. I feel so honored to be in the company of all these amazing book artists, because I am a book lover. I love books. I buy books the way some women buy shoes. You know? And when I was listening to Cindy talk about making books in elementary school, at first I thought, I haven't really made any books. But then I was like, yeah, I've made a few. Over the years, I made them as gifts for people. And the first book that I made that was a commission, I am a fiber artist, by the way. I am a fiber artist who quilts. And I'm also a hand stitch practitioner. I love slow stitch. So my work is all about that. Years ago, I was commissioned to make a book, affirmation book, for Mata Ajafi, who was battling cancer at the time. Her husband asked me to make the book. Her husband is Arthur Jaffe. And they both have transitioned, but his book collection is at FAU, the Jaffe Book Art Center. And you can actually go and see the book that I made. It was a doll that had positive affirmations in it for Mata to read when she was going through her recovery from cancer. The book that I had in the show is called Daily Prayer. This is the picture of the cover. And each page was a quilt. And each page was sewn by hand, and all the fabrics that were used in it were either dyed, batik, bogalan, which is mud cloth. All the fabric was made by hand. I have a couple little pieces in here of ankara, which wasn't. I call the book the Daily Prayer because the words in the book were the line from one of my daily prayers. And I broke down that line, and each page has a section of the line that I illustrated. And the line is, "Let me be an open landing place for my blessings." So I just love that line. I learned this prayer, and I said, oh my God, I'm gonna put that in a book someday, you know? And so when Cindy, the call went out, I was like, okay, now is the time. So the cover of the book here, you can see I hand stitched and bound it. This symbol, there's a lot of symbols in the book. There are Reiki symbols in the book because I'm a Reiki practitioner. I'm also 22 years massage therapy, so I do energy work. So it's a holy book is what I made. And I incorporated a lot of my own love for cloth and love for creating and love for spirit into that book. So it left. But this symbol here is an Adinkra symbol. It's no Soyami, I think I'm pronouncing it correctly, but it looks like a sun, and it means child of God. My name is Kianga, my first name, and it means sunlight. And so my logo is a sun, so this was kind of me putting my signature on the front of the book. Inside the book, the pages were indigo pages that I had dyed, fabric that I had dyed. And this was actually a page from a class I took with Cindy with cyanide print. And what I did is I made a slit in the back and I stuffed it so that it looked like I started out making dolls, so it rose up off the book. This is another page. I really tried to illustrate each segment of the poem, segment of the prayer. This page was an open landing place, and I thought, what better landing place than in the arms of your mom or someone who loves you, you know? And this is all hand stitching up here. I did bring some of my work so you could get an idea of what I do. This is one of my quilts that I recently finished, and it's pretty much all hand stitched. This is discharge dye that I did around the border in the black. I had some black napkins, and I dyed those, discharge dyed those, cut them into strips, and made the border. And the border is machine stitched. But this centerpiece here, the fabric looked like hieroglyphs. And the spaces where you see I have the blue, I cut that out of that one big piece. And this is a transfer image. I use photographs from Upsplash, which is copyright-free photographs that you can use, and I transferred it to hand-painted fabric, and then I hand-stitched the whole thing. I stitched my name here, bottom, and it's signed. Another piece that I did, if there was a challenge on Instagram to create a quilt for Beyonce's birthday last year. And and you know, I usually don't have time for challenges or anything like that, but I said, what the heck, I'm gonna give it a try. And this was actually a photo of her that was in Harper's Bazaar. And so I transferred the image of her face onto cloth, and then I just recreated the photograph from fabric. The whole piece is hand stitched. The border is machine stitched together, and that's that. So I really loved making the book. Like I said, each page was a quilt itself, and I used a 5-inch doll making needle to hand stitch the whole thing together. Some of the pages had these beads. Let's see if I can find them. I wrapped, these beads were made by wrapping fabric around straw and then cutting them into smaller beads. And they were hand stitched here. Oh, she's upside down. And this piece is called Keep Your Head to the Sky. So I think that's about it. I think I covered the waterfront, as my grandmother would say. Any questions about the book or my work?
Do you want to tell what the discharge printing is? Not everyone will know what that is.
Sure. It's like bleach, but I know that you can, like on black fabric, you can use bleach. You can just use bleach. But we did this at Suzanne's spot, so I know it was much more than that. But it's like tie-dye, but you use it on black fabric. So you still do the same process of tying and binding and twisting the fabric, and then you put it in bleach. And so it takes away the color. So and you get, when you take the color away from black, you get this gray. Well, you know, I'm definitely gonna create more books. I actually did illustrate a children's book with my artwork, but I do wanna do more books in cloth, in my medium. So, thank you.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Neily. I'm also a textile artist. I make art quilts, but I didn't start out doing that. I'm like a lot of people who are into textiles. Started out as a kid picking up scraps of fabric from my mom, who was a great sewer. She made my sister and I identical outfits. Everybody thought we were twins, although we were a year apart. Anyway, I fell in love with textiles and sewing when I was young, and started making clothes when I was a teenager. I lived in the backwoods of Nova Scotia, so there weren't a lot of really wonderful shops in order to buy your clothes. So I started making my own. I'd get Vogue patterns and start making my own clothes. And eventually I started making wedding gowns for my classmates that were graduating high school and going into college, and went from there. And when I came to Florida in 1980, I just uprooted and wasn't doing any art at all for the longest time. So what I did, I learned and got involved with learning how to paint miniatures. And I did that for a long time. But then my paintings grew and grew and grew until I got to be a mural artist. But I was painting, and at one point I just really wanted to come back and work with textiles. I hadn't done that in a long time. And so I started making clothes. I met my husband here, and he was in charge of a pioneer settlement. He got me into Florida's history and Florida's environment. And I fell in love. I fell in love with Florida. Up until then, I was kind of, it was nice, but I really preferred Nova Scotia, where I had grown up. And so I asked him, what can I do? What can I do to help teach Florida history? And he said, tell the story of women. So for many years, I became a storyteller about the women who came here, became pioneers, starting with the 16th century. I talked about the Native American women that were here, and I went through each era, going into schools and teaching. And with each of these, I had to create a costume. And so I started through my storytelling, getting back into becoming a fiber artist. Eventually, I was able to get a commission from the National Park Service to create 16th century clothing for DeSoto National Memorial. And then in 2013, we celebrated our quincentennial anniversary here in Florida. And I was able to get awarded a Florida Humanities Grant to talk about Florida's clothing during the 16th century. Most of the people whom I knew that were in the reenactment field were doing mid-16th century Florida, and they were dressing accordingly. And they had to learn, in order to reenact the 1513, the founding of Florida, with Juan Ponce de Leon, they had to dress differently. And so I got a grant to travel around the state teaching people how to dress appropriately for 1513. If you want to know anything about that, come and see me. And then I started getting involved with the Tampa Bay Surface Design Guild. And they inspired me. They taught me so many things about surface design and fabric and how to do all kinds of things with it. And that's what I did with my little book. This book speaks to somewhat of my love of Florida. It says, Florida, the Sunshine State. And over the years, I've collected a lot of fabrics and ephemera, all kinds of laces and doilies. The other thing that concerns me, Black Lives Matter. I've been involved in all kinds of projects over the years that have to do with Florida's Black history. And right now I'm also working and developing a Black history program at Reflections of Manatee over in Bradenton. And so I'm very, very excited about that and bringing that history alive. This is LBGTQ. I work with a committee in Gulfport here in just not far from here where I live, and I work with the LGBT committee. We're trying to raise money to add a new floor to the library so that they can have a bigger meeting space. And choice is another issue that concerns me as a woman. And of course, peace, because our world is at war. Some of the other things that I've done with this book is I've done cutaways. These pages can be 5 or 6 layers of fabric, and then I cut down with them, through them, and reveal colors below and do some embroidery work. And in this one, I've added my seeds of change. These are seeds from my garden, from my beach sunflower. So that's my story. Thank you.
My name is Marie Prins, and I'm a mixed media artist who occasionally makes artist books. And there are 4 of my artist books in this exhibition. One is Captivity, in the middle of the floor. It's a big book in an animal crate, an antique animal crate, with a poem by Louisa Erdrich. Then there's another little book up on a pedestal over there, and that's called Rain Dancer, with a poem that I wrote on handmade paper. And then there's this book over here, which is A War Far and Near, with a poem written by American poet Timothy Houghton. I stitched that, and that has a variation on the piano hinge binding. And then this is a book that won 2nd place in the exhibition. So I'll tell you a little bit more about this book, but first I'll tell you a little bit about my background. I was born and raised in South Africa. I left school at the age of 16 and went to art school, studied graphic art, and worked in advertising agencies in Johannesburg, London, Toronto, and other places. And decided that wasn't for me. So I went back to school. I went to the San Francisco Art Institute and studied painting, got a BFA, went on to get an MA and then a PhD, all in art. And I've been in Florida for the past 22 years, and next month I'm leaving Florida. So this is the last time you ever see me. So this book here was started after my son Yaromaya passed away on September the 10th of 2016. I, of course, was devastated, and a little bit before I left, a little bit before I had that experience of my son's death, I had received a grant from Creative Pinellas that allowed me to travel to India. So I had already made the plans to go to India. I decided, yes, I'm going to go. I went to an artist retreat in India, and there I abandoned all my projects, my planned projects, for what I was going to do with this grant money. I fell in love with the trees that were surviving in India in spite of the pollution, in spite of the drought. They were surviving on this beautiful campus at Sanskriti Kendra. And so I picked the leaves off the trees and started working with those leaves. And shortly after my return, my son's widow sent me a whole bunch of his poems, a big stack of his poems. So I decided over a period of months that I was going to write a book with his poems and my art, create a book. So that was A Leaf in the Wind, which has his poems and my art. So this poem here was written in 1997 by my son, and it's called As Each Moon Passes. It was written for his friend Andrea when he was living in a spiritual community. And I love this poem. So when the friend, Andrea, shared it with a mutual friend, I decided I was going to include it in this book, but I was also going to make a separate book. So this is a book that evolved. It's made with Japanese mulberry paper, and it has 2 echo prints on it, where I've actually taken the leaf from India and made echo prints with those actually. One of those is a teak leaf, and the other one is silky oak. I've used those leaves throughout the images in this book, tracing around those Indian leaves and then placing them on these backgrounds of watercolor paper, like that. Oops. There you go. So those are all actual Indian leaves that I've traced around, and then I made a series of prints, 2 of which went into As Each Moon Passes. So I used bamboo because my son loved India, and so do I. He loved everything Indian. And I discovered as I was traveling around India that they use in construction, where we would be using steel and metal, they were using bamboo in the most interesting and original ways. So I thought that was a great metaphor for giving spine to something, to give this book a spine with bamboo. So that's how that works. And of course this book can be laid flat, it could be open like that, or as we had it displayed on the back of the wall, upright. As Each Moon Passes, for Andrea on her birthday, 1997. As each moon passes, you get brighter. When the cycle is in motion, there are oceans of life. Each wave that arises forms a unique existence, playing and frothing on the surface. When the wave subsides, its unity is as apparent as a rose in a field of daisies. In this way, you never grow old or die, but remember what you always were. As each moon passes, you get wiser. When the sands of the desert take hold of a breeze, there is in creation a seemingly separate existence dancing in sync with the air current, twirling in whirls of enjoyment over the calm substratum of sand. When breeze merges with sky, sand falls into union as if it had never left. In this way, you dance out your life to the beat of the spanda until one day you fall into the vast space of love. As each moon passes, you get fuller on the path of the sitters who traverse over mountains and through woods to your grandmother's house, for you are missed and deeply longed for. When you arrive, she will hug you so tightly your bodies will meld into one. As each moon passes, you get closer to the place that waits for the sleeper to waken, bright and full. For the sun of your soul is never extinguished.
I'm an abstract expressionist who loves drawing the figure, who's always done some sort of craft. My book is made of drawings that I've done. It's actually a long process, but my tirade is in here if anybody needs to read it about why I decided. I do figure drawing, and I think of them as being like short poems or haikus as opposed to long epic poems. All of the drawings in this are done on handmade paper, which I've made from my old drawings. I chose just a regular traditional perfect bound codex for this, and it also includes beading, one of the other things that I can't stop doing. For a long time, I was writing little short poems to go with the drawings, but I decided some time ago that probably they should be books. So each one has a drawing and there's a poem that goes with it. I won't read all of them. I never was a writer before, but my drawings have always told me their names, but lately they've been, telling me their stories as well. All right, this one is called The Lean. Twisting toward the light, the woman can see ahead. She leans in, thinks hard. This one is called Push. She avoids connection, keeping all distant, arm's length. It's safer that way. She turns and strides off, deciding to walk her path on her own for now. And there's a couple more. So I've got into books quite a while ago. When I graduated from art school, I got a job in graphic design, and one of the things I ended up doing was catalogs and brochures, and that was my favorite thing to do because a lot of people had budgets to make really complicated brochures where I could do different kinds of folds and die cuts and some engineering for pop-up things. So it was, I really got into, the enjoyment of making that a long time ago. And it continues. From time to time I'll make books. Usually in the past I've made blank books. I used to sell them here. I did a whole series of sort of self-help books. I called them Books of Becoming, and they would fold out in all these different ways, and they were based on the tarot. But after I sold the last one, I decided that was a lot of work. So I haven't made more, but I may again. So my other two books that I've got completed are both up at the Morean Arts Center. And they're more unusual. One of them is an accordion fold, and they're on wood panels, so they fold into a box. They sort of become a box, or you could unfold them and they become a sculpture And then the other one is a fan. It's sort of like this, but it's bound with beads, so it opens out into like a round thing. And I really am so happy that you had this show, because it got me doing this, which I was putting off doing, that I wanted to do and intended to do. It's like, okay, I'm making some books now. I'm gonna bind my drawings, and I'm gonna write poems that go with them. And I never thought I was a writer, and maybe I'm still not, but I have really enjoyed writing all of these poems. I'm one of the artists upstairs in Art Lofts, and we have 18 different artists, and everybody does incredibly different work, and it's all really interesting and wonderful. We're open for art walk. Come on up. All right, well, thank you very much.